Now, if you're unfamiliar with the TinyGo, this is a tiny whoop with a 4K camera with built-in DVR, and it remains one of the few drones with a 4K camera on it. So this was one of the reasons why I actually bought this drone in the first place. Now, the image coming from this drone is spectacular, guys, but due to the size and weight of this drone, it is susceptible to micro shakes. Now, one of the ways we can solve that is by putting this into a stabilization program like Gyroflow and stabilizing the footage. Unfortunately, that requires gyroscopic data. Now, every flight controller does provide that information, but unfortunately, this drone doesn't have the capability to record that gyro information. Hence the reason why we have this $10 part here. Now, this is a data logger or a black box you can attach to your flight controller. Now, these things vary in price anywhere from $3 up to $20. This one here is around $10. I'll leave the link down below where you can find a few of these. And once we install this, we can have gyro data and therefore stabilize the 4K video from this drone. And that's the plan today. Now, this drone has a lot of characteristics to make this perfect for a data logger, including a space back here just to install it. You also have a free UART on this flight controller. Then you also have the high resolution camera here so you can crop in for the Gyroflow, as well as this wide field of view on this lens right here. So this drone here is the perfect candidate to put the image into Gyroflow and turn this into a cinematic whoop. So with that said, let's head over to the bench and install this data logger. Okay, so at the workbench, we have our TinyGo right here, as well as our data logger right here. And the first thing we're gonna do is disassemble this and get access to the flight controller. Now, it's as easy as removing 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll have access to the flight controller. One thing to note though is that once you remove these screws, don't just yank this canopy off because there are some wires that are connecting the actual DVR to the flight controller and VTX. So let's just get these 4 screws out and take a look at those. All right, so there's 3 and 4. A couple of things to know here. We're just gonna unplug this DVR to the VTX. There it goes. The canopy is technically free, and there it goes. So now you have your canopy separate from your drone and your VTX. Now there's a little wire here. This is to control the camera. I have one wire that's loose, a black wire here that's loose. Typically this isn't going to matter, but because we are going to be using this camera now for cinematic footage or recording, then it might be in your best interest to reconnect that. I'll be using this now to change maybe the aspect ratio, the resolution, maybe the saturation and contrast on this camera. And you can do that with the 5-way joystick, which is the purpose of this little harness right here. Now, as you can see, we're left here with the actual VTX on top, and then the flight controller is right below. So we need to remove the actual VTX as well. It's just 3 screws. And we'll talk about this harness a little bit later as we have to do some changes in my case specifically. So here's your VTX, pretty cool. All right, so here's the flight controller. This is what we're looking for. This is the main deal here. This is where we're gonna connect our open logger or the data logger to the flight controller. Now, this is a pretty important step, guys. To connect this requires a UART, a free UART. Now, you might be asking, can I connect this to an S-Bus pad? Well, yes and no. Now, there've been people trying to do that with the S-Bus pad. In fact, I considered doing that. Well, the S-Bus pad doesn't have enough data transfer, so the amount of data that can transfer through an S-Bus isn't enough to log your data. So it does require a UART pad to make this work. Fortunately for us, we do have 2 UARTs on the TinyGo. One is used initially by the VTX for smart audio, and then the second one is just free. So you do have a spare audio. Now, my drone in particular has been modified. As you can see in the back here, I do have an Express LRS receiver in here. That was the first mod that I did to this drone. And because of that receiver upgrade, I did have to use the remaining UART, the free UART on here. So unfortunately for my case, I have no other free UARTs to make this logger work. Now, in my case, since I don't have any more free UARTs, unfortunately, I'll have to remove the one for the smart audio. For me personally, that's not a big deal, only because this is only a 200 milliwatt VTX, and I only run this thing at 200 milliwatts. I can't really go higher or lower. So having smart audio really isn't gonna matter at this point. Now, the schematic for this open logger here is same as any other device using the UART. You have 4 connections. You have ground, 5 volts, and then a TX and RX. Because this is just recording data and not sending data, you don't have to connect the TX, that's why it's missing, all you have to connect is the RX where it's receiving information. And just like any other device, you connect the RX to the TX of the flight controller. Now that we figured out the wiring, let's talk about where I'm going to install this. This thing is very small, simple, just the size of an SD card. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. It has a SD card slot. On the back here, you have the connections on here. Now my plan is to mount this right on the back end on top of where I have my receiver. And this little flat place right here is the perfect location for that, as you can see. And then I'll have access to the SD card in the back. It's almost like it was made for it. All right, looks like these wires are already pre-tinned as well. So let's pre-tin these pads. These pads are relatively sized on here. So let's do the first one, RX. All right, that looks good. Good adhesion. All right. All right, 3 wires done. Technically, I should be able to just shrink wrap this thing. I do need to desolder that green wire, which is a smart audio. We'll be using that. Boom, I got it. Awesome. Looks good. That's gonna go to the red. I am hesitant to pulling this out, but I have to. All right, the flight controller is free. I didn't have intention of doing that, but I'll be doing some further modifications to the flight controller, so I need to pull it out anyway, so let's just get it out. All right, let's see if we can get this 5-volt pad on here. Oh, that one actually adhered pretty good. Let's try the black one now. It's in there. And let's see if I can attach this to there. Perfect. All right, only one left to do. I need to test and see if this thing here works. So let's get some batteries. And we'll look to see if both the data logger and the receiver powers up. One, and here we go. It's the big moment right here. All right, they both power up, as you can see. Pretty cool. All right, so here we are. I have my XT30 connection right here. We're just gonna upgrade the connection on my TinyGo from the PH 2.0. Now, talking about that, these batteries here are the stock one that came with the TinyGo 530s. And these things weigh very similar to my XT30 batteries, my 2S XT30 batteries. So there's really no benefit in keeping them. This might get a little hot, so let's use the pliers. Perfect. Really good. Yikes. All right, our connector is off. PH 2.0. Let's see here. Keep it steady, bro. Wow. So now we can actually use a XT30 battery. Let's see if we have a fresh one. That's pretty cool. And now I have a smoke stopper. Let's see if it works. Where's my light? So I want to make sure everything looks good. And there you go. Everything is lit, guys. Look at that. Our job here is done as far as the soldering, guys. Let's just reassemble this bad boy, put it back together. We're content with that. I think at this point, I can put the shrink wrap on here. So let's put this off, put the heat gun on. Look at that, that looks good. So let's reinstall the VTX. Since I'm here, I'm just gonna change the antenna on the VTX. This will be the second upgrade. Just need to reattach this. Perfect, that's a better bond than what it came with from the factory. All right, DVR is back in here. Just to put the canopy back on here as well. All right, there it is. There we go. All right. Look at it, it's done. It's looking pretty good, guys. All right, guys, so here it is. TinyGo 4K Cinema Beast. We have Express LRS on here. We now have an XT30 on here, and we have an upgraded antenna on here. So hopefully all this stuff here works out and pans out for the better. So let's go to the computer. I'm gonna put an SD card in here and see if there's any information being logged when I arm this drone. Okay, so we're here at the computer. We have our TinyGo right here with all our modifications. We have our data logger here. We also have a new XT30 connector on here and also our new VTX antenna. So this thing has been pretty tricked out for this one video. So the first thing we need to do is change these settings on this, and that requires going on Betaflight. So I have Betaflight right here, and we just want to connect this to the computer. Still have access to my micro USB port. And we have two lights, a red light and a flashing blue light, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now the first thing we need to do is go to the ports tab to set up this new device. Now that's because we just installed this new data logger and it's connected to a new UART. Now for me, I installed the data logger into UART 1. In your case, it might be UART 2 if you haven't used that free UART. So in this case, it does show it right here. It shows TBS Smart Audio. We can change it to black box logging right there, and then the baud rate. Typically, it will go to 115200, but in this case, we have a decent processor and we have faster memory cards, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in that case, that looks all good, and all this looks good. So let's just save and reboot. And then the second thing we need to do is go to the black box tab and then configure this for black box login or configuration. Now it says no login here, and that makes sense because this small tiny whoop doesn't have any built-in memory into the flight controller, so there's no login on there. But in this case, you can do it externally with this serial port, and then you can choose your hertz here. In this case, we're gonna try 1 kilohertz for now. Now, two things can happen if you go really, really high, like 4 kilohertz, which is not bad still. The first thing is that you might send too much information to the SD card and it can't write it to the memory card, depending on the performance both of the device and of the capabilities of your SD card. The second thing is that if you increase this really high, you might increase the CPU load. Now this is a F4 processor, and data logging isn't anything new. This has been in existence for a long time. So I think with modern computers or modern CPUs, it shouldn't be a problem. Now, as far as black box debug mode, you want to choose something like gyro scale, since we're using this for gyroscopic information. And here it is, and then just save and reboot. And now I'm going to insert my SD card or my micro SD card into the actual logger. So it's as simple as just putting it in here. Pretty straightforward, like any other, USB device. And once I power this up, if everything is configured correctly, we should have two files on here. One should be a configure file, and then the other should be a log file. All right, and this looks good. Now I have a red light and then just nothing on here. Now this blue light went away. It was flashing initially because there was no SD card in this device. Now that we have a proper SD card in here, it's showing that it's off. Now once I arm the drone, then this thing will start to write to the SD card. Hopefully that's true. We'll take a look at this right now. If everything is correct, we should have a file on here. All right, as we said, we have two files in here. One is a CFG configuration and one is a log. So as you fly this drone more and more, then you're gonna have more and more log files. This one says 000, there's nothing on here. If I were to do a flight, then you'll see one that says log 001. Now, a really, really important thing to note here is that, these data loggers were made a long time ago. I mean, I haven't seen any new documentation for this thing in the past, I wanna say 6 to 8 years. That's the last thing I've seen an update on these things. So a lot of the cards they were using initially with this were very old and very small. Now I went to the store today actually to buy a new SD card for this, and the smallest I could find was 32. Actually, it was 64 gigs. No, it's 32, and the 32 could not work, it was too large. I think what they recommend is a 16 gig SD card or under. Luckily, I had a really old 2 gig SD card. Now, having said that, guys, because this thing hasn't been supported in so long, there's not too many videos or instructions how to do this. So it took me a while to figure this out. So the first thing here you want to do is open up this CFG file. It's a text file, obviously. We'll use the notepad. And as you can see, there's a lot of information on here. Now, a couple things you want to change here is change this to 2 million. Now, this baud right here is important because it does match what I said in Betaflight. So these two have to match. As we saw before in our ports tab, I did select that as well. So that is really good, and I don't have to make any changes to this file right here. So that's pretty good. And here's our log file. I don't think there should be any log on there. As you can see, there's nothing on here because we did not arm the drone. So everything on my SD card is good so far, guys. This looks really, really good. So let's go outside, fly this for a few minutes and see how the image looks once we stabilize it in Gyroflow.